blue when you look at that. I'm not sure why we ended up with blue for Democrats and red for Republicans. It used to be the other way around because those are the two colors that more match their ideology. Tim?
Well, it's now 221 for John Kerry, 269 for George Bush, but the Kerry campaign says no, don't give them Ohio. It's 249. Michigan, Wisconsin, New Hampshire continue to lean Kerry, which you give him is 252. Iowa, Nevada, New Mexico, lean Bush would be 266, plus the 20 from Ohio would give him his 269. No one's at 270. We're still waiting with 6 states still outstanding. The Kerry campaign says 7 states outstanding, including Ohio.
And what they're doing here, they're like somebody who has to keep drawing the right face card. They just drew another face card that works for their hand, and whether they can get it all the way out to what they need to get to is what we have to wait and determine. We'll be back from Democracy Plaza, Decision 2004, in a moment.
And the members of the Kerry camp, John Kerry himself, also they're huddled up behind closed doors, and as Kelly Wright pointed out earlier tonight, that we should not be expecting any statement from John Kerry until about 10 o'clock.
Divisive figure, et cetera, et cetera. This might be a place where he doesn't want to continue stepping on toes. They're probably, I would think, massaging whatever statement he's going to make it as palatable as possible to as many people as possible.
George, I'm going to ask, while we're talking here for a moment, our political unit to try to reach out and see how conservatives, if we can compute that in any way, how conservatives voted. Because if you'd read some of the conservative commentary in, like, American Conservative Magazine and other places over the last days and weeks, you would have found a group of Americans deeply dissatisfied with a conservative president.
I think that's right. They're dissatisfied about deficits, and then they think of John Kerry and vote anyway. They're dissatisfied about the Medicare prescription drug entitlement, and then they say to themselves 3 times, Supreme Court, Supreme Court, Supreme Court, and voted for Mr. Bush anyway. So it seems to me that the conservative anxieties and dissatisfactions, though real, are at the margin.
So Cokie Roberts, one of the challenges for the Republican Party in the next 4 years is to build on the base that's been so successful for Mr. Bush this time, include the conservatives, and perhaps include more of the center.
Well, I think that is going to be a challenge if the president chooses to do that, and I think he probably will choose to do that. But he certainly doesn't have to, given the results of this election. Given the gains in both the House and the Senate and his own apparent popular vote victory, he can continue to govern the way he has been. It's my guess that because he was so trained by his father's defeat to guard his base and to not lose the conservatives no matter what. And in our exit polls, by the way, he did, the conservatives were 33% of the voters. He won 83% of them. Well. And so I think that now if he's never going to run again. So depending on what he wants to do, if what he wants to do is make a big paradigm shift in the country and make it a more conservative country, that's one thing. If what he wants to do is leave a legacy as a uniter, not a divider, that's another thing altogether.
It's already a more conservative country, George, than people ever would have imagined 10 years ago, and the rest of the world hasn't quite come to grips with that yet. But the liberal years in America, at least for the moment, are over.
I think that's right, although you have to understand this is a president who's increased discretionary domestic spending faster than anyone since Lyndon Johnson. He has enlarged the welfare state more than anyone since Lyndon Johnson. So there's a clear sense in which he could turn around to the country and say, what do I have to do to show that I have some openings toward the center?
Fareed.
Well, I think that because of this somewhat disputed business with Ohio, we're probably not laying out the situation quite as clearly with regard to the overall picture. This is a dramatic defeat for the Democratic Party. The president and the Republican Party have made very significant gains everywhere. The president has, as George Stephanopoulos has mentioned often, a new legitimacy because of the popular vote. And I think the legacy that President Bush is looking for is the one that they talked about a couple of years ago, which was remaking the politics of the country kind of William McKinley, Mark Hanna realignment of the country.
Now, not everybody's going to get that one.
The late 19th century, an attempt to create a permanent Republican majority, which will be done through redistricting, through state legislatures, through control of the House and the Senate, through control of the Supreme Court. So,
but Fareed, hold it for just a second, because one of the things that's surely going to be said about the Republican Party, for all of its success this year with its base, the base hasn't grown very significantly.
you don't need it to grow that significantly if you can use the instruments of government. And they will have a majority of the state houses, a majority of the governorships, and all three branches of government to entrench them permanently in a way that makes the Democratic Party the permanent minority party. I think that is more likely to be the goal of Karl Rove and George W. Bush than to have, a little bit of nice press from the media about bipartisanship.
Michael Beschloss, do you think this is becoming the right nation, as someone has called it?
It is becoming a more conservative country, and I think people are probably a little bit misguided if they think that George Bush is going to move to the center in a second term.
I didn't know where that was coming from either, to be honest.
Yeah, because, you think about 2000, if anyone was going to be at the center, here was someone who won in a disputed election, came in with as narrow a margin as you could possibly have. That would have been a time that you might have expected someone to come in and appoint Democrats to the cabinet, maybe be more moderate than he had expected because the margin was so narrow. Instead, George Bush said, essentially, I'm going to govern as if I had a margin, as if I won with 60% in 2000. So after this re-election, I think he will feel that that's sort of a sign of his success and move on in the same direction.
So last word, I think, on this for the moment, at least, to you, George Stephanopoulos. Where did this notion, I've heard it 2 or 3 times tonight, though Michael contradicts it, this idea that Mr. Bush might suddenly step closer to the center. Is there any indication that he feels a more natural affinity for the center?
Not much, except in his rhetoric saying he wants to be a uniter, not a divider. But I'll take the other side for just a second for 2 reasons. Number one, Iraq. He's got a big bill coming for Iraq at the beginning of the year. He's got
another
$70 billion probably, and he's got 140,000 troops there. He's going to need bipartisan support from at least some Democrats on the issue of Iraq. Number 2, the second issue is Social Security, private accounts for Social Security. He's not going to be able to push that, and he won't want to push that with just Republican votes. He'll want to reach out to Democrats on that issue. So you might have a counterintuitive, somewhat ironic twist. When President Bush appears to need to go to the center after his first election, he doesn't. When it appears that he doesn't have to move to the center after his second election, he does.
Just before I come back to Iraq, I see that George Will is taking off his harness. So I'd like you to get a picture of him taking off his harness. George, it's okay you're going. I hope it's a pressing engagement. You've done a great job. Thank you very much indeed. We would not have had as interesting an evening on this and many other occasions had it not been for George Will. George Stephanopoulos, let me bring you back to this question of Iraq. Vice President Cheney said any number of times in this campaign that things are going great in Iraq, that everything's on track in Iraq. I don't know many people who actually believe that, to be perfectly honest, and whether it's sold in the campaign or not, I do not know. The president and the country may well be in for a very rough ride.
And some of the darker, more bloody days we see right on the edge of it right now. There's been so much talk recently in the last 10 days or so of an impending move on the city of Fallujah, that hotbed of the terrorists. We've been bombarding it every day. A lot of talk about another ground operation that is likely to be bloody, house-to-house combat in Fallujah, and we're no closer to seeing a reduction of American troops there than we were a year ago, and it was, of course, the original intention of the Bush administration to try to get 100,000 of those troops out within the first year.
You make a very interesting point about the war and the president needing Democratic votes as well as Republicans in the Senate. I see no apparent reason tonight why Democrats will cease to fight the president on the question of the war.
Some. On the other hand, there are some Democrats. Let's take Senator Joseph Biden, the ranking Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee.
Who might have been the Secretary of State in a Kerry administration.
Well, let me just raise it. I'm glad you brought that up. He was on my program a couple weeks ago, and I asked, would he be willing to serve as Secretary of State under President Bush if President Bush won again? And he didn't say no. And I would just think...
NBC, we have made the judgment that the president is the winner in the state of Ohio, and it's 20 electoral votes, putting him just one vote shy of what he needs, 270. But we are not the arbiters of this. We do not declare who is the president because we don't have the power. We just give you our best judgment. And part of our best judgment at the moment is that this is an open contest in Ohio because of what the Kerry people have decided is a premature judgment on our part. That's every bit their right and their obligation to their supporters and also to themselves. And so we'll have to see all of that plays out. We'll be back with more. I'm not sure what more means, but we'll be back with more from Democracy Plaza, Decision 2004 after this.
What's in a name? As it turns out,
said, could you please color it red? They also are reaching out to the Secretary of State of Ohio to try to get information from him, to try to get him to make it clear.
Wisconsin's been out there for a very long time in a state of suspension. Still don't know which way it's going to go. Iowa with 7 electoral votes, very close there. They've stopped counting for the night, may start counting sometime mid-morning. We don't know. New Mexico, they're still counting, 5 electoral votes there. The provisional ballots could, underscore the word could, be a factor in New Mexico as time goes along. Ohio is where it is, which is to say John Kerry cannot win unless he carries Ohio. If he carries Ohio, he would be in the hunt. If he carries Ohio, if he then carries Wisconsin and Iowa, that would be 17 and 20, 37. That would put him over the top and then some. Anthony Mason is monitoring last night's vote. Anthony, unlike Florida in 2000, Ohio in 2004 has some experience with provisional ballots. Tell us about that.
Dan, that's right. I mean, we've been talking a lot now in the last few hours about the Kerry campaign pinning its last hopes in Ohio on these provisional ballots. Well, while provisional ballots are new in a lot of states this year, Ohio has used them before. And in the 2000 election, it's interesting to note that when 100,000 provisional ballots were cast in Ohio, about 90% of those were found to be legitimate. That's one reason why the Kerry campaign may be holding out some hope here. Ohio Secretary of State Ken Blackwell says there could be as many as 175,000 provisional ballots this time, though that's still, it's important to note, just an estimate. Blackwell has said it'll be impossible to declare a winner until those 175,000 provisional ballots are counted, a process that may not begin for 11 days. And if you're thinking Blackwell might have some political motivation here to drag this process out, it is in fact Ohio law, and Blackwell himself is a Republican. Dan?
Even more reason to say we move cautiously with Ohio. As we've said before, we tried to learn from the experience in Florida in 2000. That's one reason we're being so cautious in saying how Ohio is going to go this time. Dan Rather at CBS News Election Headquarters in New York.
On the popular vote as of now. So as of now, with 110.5 million votes counted, Mr. Bush is winning 51% of the popular vote, and Mr. Kerry at 48%. So George Stephanopoulos, here is, I actually think you've already said it, here's a very, very significant thing for the president in terms of saying whatever he does in the next several days about a mandate, if it turns out to be that, then that he has won the popular vote.
That's a healthy margin. I believe it's a bigger margin than Richard Nixon had in 1968, a bigger margin than John Kennedy had in 1960. It's not particularly close for an American president, and also he's above 50%, as I said earlier in the evening, the first president since his father in 1988 to get 50% of the vote.
Mark Halpern was just saying that various Democrats have gone to sleep. Also true over at the Reagan building. We do not make fun of anybody at this time of the night. It is 5 minutes to 5 Eastern time. This looks a little bit like a civil defense drill, but the truth of the matter is those are people relaxing on the floor over at the Reagan building while they wait for some decision some decision from the president about what he is going to say in the moment. People going around watching. And that is our correspondent at the White House, Terry Moran, outside the White House on his favorite BlackBerry. He's been on the air so long. Yes, I know. It's just the wind, Terry Moran. I want to go very, that's him live. I want to go very quickly to California. No, I'm afraid I don't have time to go to California. We're going to go off the air in just a couple of minutes and return to regular programming. We will come back on the air when something of import happens, and almost everything that happens now is going to be of import. But take a look at our national board. This is where things stand as of the moment. As you heard John Dunn.
Victory in Ohio.
And don't forget, most of the balloting in Ohio was with the old punch card system that we saw in Florida and the Chads, and we haven't even gotten to that stage yet of some of the spoiled ballots that may have been thrown out that'll be challenged. So we could be looking at Chads again in Ohio.
Yes. But as we were told, Ohio actually has a system to determine what is a real Chad, and what is a valid Chad, and what is a three-cornered Chad.
I'll be curious to see that.
But you know, we're not really arguing about miscount here, are we?
No, not yet.
It's different. We're not arguing about whether people were unfairly disenfranchised because their Chad was 2/3 or 3/4 rather, and we're not really arguing about that.
This is undercount.
There are votes that haven't been counted yet. The provisional ballots just haven't been counted yet.
It seems to me that they're looking at. Let's take a look at the Bush headquarters of the party tonight and see if there's as much. This is what I like. I knew this was coming. People are actually lying on the floor.
They look like we feel.
This looks like one of these refugee centers. The people they're very well dressed, of course. But look, they've just given up waiting. I mean, they've been waiting for.
Godot.
That's right. For all these hours for the president to make an appearance, but they must have known this was going to be a close election. You have to realize a lot of these people showed up at this party just around 12 X many hours ago, when it looked like the president was going to lose the election. These are the stalwarts who went in here thinking their guy was going to lose. The president of the United States was going to take a fall tonight, and now they are taking a fall themselves.
That's a fall. Right.
Look at this. This is going to be one of those Life magazine pictures of the year.
I don't see his chest going up and down.
Let's enjoy these pictures here. They're look at these. Everybody's going home. Look at this. That is your. We'll be right back with more Life Than That when we come back. We'll be back from Rockefeller Center in just a moment after this. We're still waiting to see if there's going to be a final call for a state tonight that will activate a presidential celebration. We'll be right back.
Do you have plain, ordinary lips or vertical lines?
Close to call green column to the white column, in which we don't have enough information yet to make any projection.
Well, we're trying to figure all this out right now, Wolf. Apparently what has happened is that the Associated Press, which we've been telling our viewers all day, they have been the source of these raw vote numbers for us, calling in votes from actual counties all over the country. They were feeding numbers into us, and then suddenly those numbers changed. In other words, there was about, I'm told, a 2,000 to 6,000 vote margin between President Bush's position and John Kerry's position, and then that margin grew suddenly to an 11,000 vote margin. And because of that, we now want to make sure, first of all, we want to find out what happened, and then determine that we want to stick with the too close to call. We are reconsidering that right now. Wolf, right now I'm told there are something like 20,000 provisional ballots outstanding in New Mexico. So technically, with if it is an 11,000 vote margin, it's difficult that one candidate might make up that difference, John Kerry, but it's possible. But if the margin is smaller, of course, it makes it more likely. If I'm being a little bit long-winded here, but what I'm telling you is that the numbers changed, and sometimes these things happen.
In a small population-wise state like New Mexico, 11,000 votes potentially could be a significant gap between Bush and Kerry right now. But we did get an announcement, Judy, from the Secretary of State of New Mexico saying they're going to hold off in making any formal declarations, at least until tomorrow, so they can continue counting ballots, absentee ballots, and other ballots.
That's right. The Secretary of State's office had said that they would hold off for a variety of reasons. We have been told tonight, Wolf, both by the state of Iowa, their Secretary of State, for a variety of reasons, some machine problems, fatigue, they said, on the part of the election officials, understandable under these circumstances. They're closing down, and New Mexico had said that we were not going to hear any more from them. Wisconsin, we are still waiting for more information on, and it's possible there could be a call in Wisconsin. I can't give you any more information right now, but that's possible. Ohio is the one state, though, that we don't have any reason to believe we're going to be able to call because of that great big provisional ballot issue still hanging out there.
Carlos wants to weigh in.
Well, you know, one of the interesting things about New Mexico is whether or not President Bush ultimately wins. This is a pretty significant achievement. Remember, in New Mexico, there are about 200,000 more registered Democrats than there are Republicans. They have a Democratic governor. One of the two U.S. senators is a Democrat. So this would be a pretty meaningful achievement just to get this close again. The other interesting thing about New Mexico that we talked about before is that their provisional ballot rules are much more liberal. Remember, there's been a debate over the last several weeks. If someone fills out a provisional ballot, but for example, they're in the wrong precinct, they're maybe in the right county, but they're in the wrong precinct, does that provisional ballot count? New Mexico is one of the places where, at least it seems for the moment, that it would count, and that could end up becoming an interesting issue.
Jeff?
Well, it just seems to me we're in this sort of state of suspended animation. I think everybody understands what happened last night, that it was a really remarkable victory for the Republicans.
Hold that thought for a minute, because I'm going to walk up here. CNN is now ready to make another projection at this late hour in the morning. CNN is now ready to project John Kerry, the winner of 10 electoral votes in Wisconsin, one of the few states still outstanding. John Kerry taking a state that Al Gore won 4 years ago, 10 electoral votes. So let's take a look at the board right now, the race for the White House, the electoral vote as we have it based on our projections. Bush with 254 electoral votes. Kerry with 252 electoral votes. 270 needed to be elected. That green dot you see on that map, that's Ohio. We simply are saying it's too close to call right now. We can't make a projection. Iowa, the Secretary of State in Iowa says they're not going to be able to resume counting ballots until tomorrow. We haven't been able to make a projection in Iowa. And New Mexico, the Secretary of State, they're saying they're going to hold off and continue counting ballots tomorrow as well. So that's what you have, 254, 252 in the Electoral College. Jeff, Wisconsin going for Kerry according to our projection.
Well, what this does is to make it very clear that this did all come down to Ohio. And one of the things I think that the Democrats will be looking at is if Ohio breaks for George W. Bush, they would have looked and said, you know, a switch of 60 or 70,000 votes in Ohio would have given the White House to Kerry, even though he would have lost the popular vote by 3.5 million votes. It really illustrates the vagaries of the Electoral College, but that's where we are now. That's what we know. And how the president in the next hour or two or three or four is supposed to go to his supporters and say exactly what. We got 4 million votes from the other guy. We did great in the Senate and the House. I'm almost sure I won Ohio and therefore the presidency, because there's no getting around that. Ohio is the difference now. Whoever wins Ohio is the president of the United States, and the odds are overwhelming.
Because all those other states in the upper Midwest, Minnesota, Michigan, and Wisconsin, they all broke for John Kerry, Carlos.
Yeah, as Jeff is saying, before we knew Wisconsin, John Kerry was at 242. And so one way or another, getting the 20 electoral votes from Ohio still would not have been enough to get him to 270. But the fact that he now has the 10 electoral votes from Wisconsin, or at least we're projecting that, that puts him in a place that Ohio could put him over the top. Probably only further intensifies the battle over Ohio. Not that it wasn't going to be intense
and
already.
There are unanswered questions in Ohio that have to be answered. We don't know how many provisional ballots are out there. We've heard all sorts of numbers being thrown out, and when we spoke to the Secretary of State of Ohio hours ago now, Ken Blackwell, he himself didn't know how many provisional ballots are out there. We've heard from Democrats maybe 250,000, 250,000. We've heard from Republicans maybe 100,000, 125,000. Some of them will be thrown out as invalid. Others will be kept. But they're not even going to start counting those provisional ballots for 11 days.
Well, that's still an awful big gap, given what we know about the rest of the country. But it does seem to me to make the point that Jeffrey Toobin was making earlier, that somebody's going to look at the numbers. Somebody's going to say just how many ballots are out there, and if it's really like 120 or 130,000, in which case John Kerry would have to get every one of them to overcome this lead. They may have a different calculus than if it turns out there are 300,000 provisional ballots which could overcome this.
And remember the second door that Jeffrey Toobin talked about, which Democrats seem unlikely to want to knock on at the moment, which is to request a recount. And so to say, let's go through the 88 counties, including 3/4 of them, which use the old punch card system, and say, let's check that out. Again, could be a public relations issue on a number of fronts, but
I suspect that given the mood of the Democrats, tantalizingly, they sense they might be close. You're shaking your head when you don't think they'll ask for a recount.
5,000 votes, 10,000 votes, sure. 125,000 votes, that's an awful lot of votes.
It is an awful lot of votes. And last time around when we were talking about Florida, as Jeff correctly points out, we were talking about a couple thousand at best that ultimately shrunk down to a couple hundred.
And 537 when all the complete dust was settled by whoever counts those kinds of ballots. So now we have to wait and see if the President of the United States is going to leave the White House tonight or this morning. It's already getting light out there. We're at Times Square. We're beginning to see some light in the middle of New York City. We're going to see if the President is still up. Does he still want to go over to the Reagan Center and make a statement to his supporters? Our White House correspondent Dana Bash is over there. What are you hearing, Dana?
Well, you know, we saw the pictures here about an hour ago. You saw the music blaring. You saw the lights up. I was just going to say that everything is much more quiet here, but they're watching us, so things have just gotten a little bit more lively here. But certainly the people who have been here for 13, 14 hours, they have been waiting. They've stopped serving drinks. They've stopped serving food, and they are still sort of as tired and as waiting in anticipation as we all are. I've talked to some people over at the campaign, over at Bush Cheney headquarters. There are people over there sleeping on couches. The senior staff, they're huddled around a conference call talking to the folks at the White House. Everybody is trying to figure out what's going on and what to do, whether or not the president is going to come over here. It's very much up in the air at this point.
Dana, I assume the crowd behind you has sort of thinned out a little bit, has it?
Thinned out a little bit, definitely. You can see there are people sleeping on the floor, kind of hanging out. They're all saying that's not true. I think we woke them up here a little bit, Wolf. They all want us to think and want us to see that they are very raucous. They are very much ready for the president to come. So perhaps we did a little bit of a service here to these guys to wake them up.
We want to see to make sure they don't fall asleep on the job over there. They're strong supporters of the president and the vice president. They're very enthusiastic. I assume they would very much like to see the president and the vice president show up there. But you're saying that's up in the air right now based on what you're hearing, Dana?
They're trying to figure it out, as John King has been reporting, and I've been hearing from the folks over at the campaign. They are trying to figure out whether or not the president, as we are hearing, the president does want to come over, or he does want to make a statement. That's why we are still seeing people waiting here for that to potentially happen. But they are certainly trying to figure out exactly what the numbers are on the ground, Wolf.
Approaching 10 minutes after 5 on the East Coast, 5 a.m. That would be John King's over at the White House, the North Lawn of the White House. John, what are you hearing now?
Wolf, I'm about to disappoint all those suddenly awake people behind Dana Bash, so she might want to run for cover. Told by senior administration officials they have just made the decision here at the White House that the president will not go to the Reagan building this morning. His campaign chairman, Mark Roscoe, will soon make a statement in which he will talk quite optimistic to that crowd and say that the president believes he has won this election. He believes in the end he will be over 280 electoral votes when all the votes are counted, but that because so many states right now, Ohio, Iowa, and New Mexico still among them, are not ready to say that this election is over, that for now they will play this out for another day, but that they believe they had won, but it will not be the president of the United States, despite his several requests to aides that let's go, let's get over there and make that statement. The president will not go. His campaign chairman will make that statement, we are told, quite soon. They will be quite optimistic. They believe they have won this election, but they also know, especially given the experience of 4 years ago, they need everyone in the country to believe it, just as when they say it, they want the country to believe it. Well,
does that mean, John, we can presume this president's about to get some sleep?
Well, the president usually hits the Oval Office about 7 o'clock and gets his national security briefing. Remember, he is not just a candidate for president, he is the president, but we will assume that he will get some sleep and perhaps start his day a little bit later today. But this president, he is very involved. He was involved in his father's campaigns. He was a campaign manager himself in his younger days. He crunches the polls. He looks at the precincts. So if this is still an open question during the day and people are checking what's happening in Ohio and in New Mexico and in other states, you can rest assured the president will be deeply involved in those details, but perhaps a few hours shut-eye first.
All right, John, stand by. Dana Bash is over at the Reagan Center, the headquarters for the Bush-Cheney campaign. I understand, Dana, Ed Gillespie, the chairman of the Republican Party, just made a little announcement to everyone gathered there.
He just came out and said a couple more minutes, but they've already seen our report, and they're starting to thin out a little bit here, starting to make their way out. Certainly, as we've been saying, that they have been here for hours and hours, since maybe 6 or 7 o'clock tonight. But now that they know that the president is probably not going to be coming here, they're starting to thin out here, Wolf.
So we'll have to wait a little bit longer to see what the president has to say, although, as John King is saying, Mark Roscoe, the chairman of the Bush-Cheney campaign, may come over and make some sort of announcement. We'll stand by to hear what he has to say. John, if you're still there, let me get a little sense of the drama that's been unfolding, the decision-making process that the president must be going through. What are the pros and cons of going ahead and saying, I won?
To have clarity in the country, to move forward as quickly as possible, to make clear there will be no transition of power. There are key decisions to be made about military offensive in Iraq. There are key decisions to be made if you are going to be the continuing president of the United States, about a State of the Union address that will come up in a month. They would like to move as cleanly and as quickly as possible. But those are the pros. Clean this up and move on. Make it clear to the American people and the world that the United States has a president. It is done and certain as soon as possible. The cons, of course, everyone remembers the bitterness of 4 years ago. Everyone remembers those questioning the legitimacy of this president. Some Democrats have done it since day one, and they continue to question the legitimacy of this president. This president
that they've won, and they're claiming victory, but we have yet to see anybody make that appearance. But as you reported just a while ago, the motor pool, the motorcade is standing by. They're going to have to take those cars and put some more gas in them for a while, after a while here, because they're still out there, I assume, with the motors running. So I don't think they know quite what they're going to do right now, but they're going to try to leave the impression that they have won because, well, that worked for them last time. I mean, I think it put them down the road toward a victory that eventually came when the Supreme Court finally ruled.
We're going to take a break. Leslie Stahl after these messages. Stick in here with us.
He had been quoted a month ago saying taking out Tom Daschle was like winning 3 seats against Democrats. So look for the Republicans to really tout this success.
Yeah, no, they really felt that he was an adversary that they wanted to get out of there because he was so effective. John Thune made an appearance in South Dakota earlier tonight to claim.
And he's carried the state by approximately 150,000 votes. And even if there's 150 or 70,000 provisional ballots out there, I think that it's very naive to expect that he would get enough votes. Traditionally, in Ohio election, the provisional ballots follow along the same percentages as the vote totals. And
so even with overseas ballots and military ballots, which also are
candidates around the country. But we've got a lot of work ahead of us now, but we feel very fortunate to come out on top.
took us till about 4 o'clock in the morning to get it all sorted out, and I haven't seen the final vote tally, but I think it's at least a margin that is comfortable enough for us to feel confident that we're going to be able to.
Tech 1 or log on to.
And a Christian conservative who barely lost to Tim Johnson just a couple of years ago.
Pretty good at counting on election night, and the votes that are counted after they come in on the overseas and the provisionals follow the same percentages as the.
Here are some ballots to be counted that are unusual. That's because a judge, when he heard that there were such long lines in some places, 3, 5, even 7 hours in Knox County, said they could be given paper ballots to fill out so they wouldn't have to continue to wait in line. You're telling me that those votes are not part of this 10-day, 11-day recount. They would have already been counted.
No, the law in Ohio requires you to count all the ballots once you start counting them. The only ones you don't count are the provisional ballots because they have to be checked against the registration records at the Board of Elections. But every ballot that was cast yesterday at the precinct level has been counted and turned into the Secretary of State.
Now, both of the Republican senators, U.S. senators from Ohio, have issued a statement, and they have said essentially John Kerry should concede, that he should not put the United States, should not put the country through another protracted election. What do you think about that statement?
Well, I think as the chairman of the Ohio Republican Party, I agree with the senators on that statement. As chairman of the Cuyahoga County Board of Elections, Senator Kerry is entitled to ask for a recount if he's within the margin of error. He's entitled to have witnesses, observers when the official count is being made. I think most of the boards would accommodate him. He can do whatever he wants, but the result's not going to change.
There's some frustration that lingers from 4 years ago. People who felt that maybe their vote wasn't counted, and that the Democrats maybe feel some sort of responsibility to those people. In fact, that's essentially what John Edwards said tonight, to make sure every vote is counted.
Well, first of all, Ohio is not Florida. We have bipartisan Board of Elections here. We have 2 Democrat, 2 Republican members that sit on every board. We have a balance within the board employees at every Board of Elections. It's an equal number of Democrats and Republicans. It's a checks and balance. We know how to count hanging chads, pregnant chads, dimpled chads in Ohio, and we do a pretty good job of counting votes in Ohio. And I think that starts right at the Secretary of State level and goes all the way down to our 88 county boards of elections.
Well, thank you very much for staying out here, and I know it's been a long night for you, Bob Bennett. You're ready to go home, get some sleep. Thank you so much for being with us. We were reporting this earlier. There is a team of lawyers that the Kerry campaign describes as the best of the best, who's been brought into Ohio. We may hear more after they do their analysis tomorrow. Certainly they will be in touch with the Kerry campaign, and then we'll see what we hear from them sometime when the sun comes up later on today. Amy, Randy, back to you.
All right, Chris Jansen in Cleveland, Ohio, a state still in play, at least in the Democrats' view at this hour.
Also another big swing state that a lot of folks were looking at as we headed into this election night, and now we're, of course, into the morning hours, is Wisconsin. We want to head out to NBC's Martin Savage, who is there in Madison with the latest for us.
10 electoral votes up for grabs there, Martin, and still up for grabs.
It still is, Randy and Amy. You're absolutely right. I mean, before the election began, before the voting took place, this was a state that was considered to be a toss-up. And now that 99% of the ballots have been counted, still considered to be a toss-up. Not exactly clear when the last 1% is going to be fully accounted for, and when finally we will know who will win. Senator Kerry is, though, leading by about 12 to 14,000 votes, so it is believed that he will probably win the state of Wisconsin, and that's not out of keeping with the Democratic tradition of the last 3 presidential elections. It was Clinton, and Gore, the way this state voted the 3 times previous, so it is expected to go Senator Kerry's way, but officially that has not happened as yet. Very heavy voter turnout, as was the case in many states across the nation. In fact, it is that heavy voter turnout that complicated some things, and there were some legal challenges that actually took place. Those were all resolved. They did not turn into bitter legal battles. So essentially, they say that the election here in the state of Wisconsin pretty much was problem-free. But 1% still waiting to be tallied. Back to both of you.
All right, Martin Savage with the latest for us. We appreciate that, Martin.
Another state still in play is New Mexico. New Mexico down there in the southwest, a state that President Bush believed he would carry. But again, and he is leading in New Mexico, we should say, by the latest polls, but it's still too close to call there.
That's right. NBC's Josh Makowitz is standing by where they are still counting the votes there in Santa Fe. Josh, what's the latest?
Well, the counting has gone on. The Secretary of State's office, which is where we are, they've gone home, and they're not expecting any more announcements until later this morning, perhaps even later than that. President Bush held a sizable lead here just a couple of hours ago, and with about 99% of the vote in, his lead has been cut as some late Democratic votes came in. The president was leading by like 29,000, 30,000 votes just a couple of hours ago. That lead now been cut to about 11,000 votes, which just plays up the importance of what's now going on and what's going to be going on later today, which is the counting of thousands of absentee ballots. There were 191,000 absentee ballots issued in the state of New Mexico. When the Secretary of State's office left here a couple of hours ago to go home and get some sleep, they told us there were still 70,000 ballots that still had to be counted.
The campaign was to get the Senate functioning again, and by that,
Same thing's happening in Ohio.
You know, Ohio's
so it's
had
just
that.
mathematically not possible.
Yeah, Chris and Sasha got to take one of these hard breaks here. Coming right back with both of you just ahead. Also on Fox and Friends, crunching numbers. We'll look at some of the key states that could still decide this election. Coming right back.
Things that have happened tonight in terms of presidential election. One, the fact that the president won not just by 0.5% or 1% in the popular vote, but it looks like he's likely to end up close to 4 million votes ahead. That's meaningful. The fact that Florida was not close by our numbers, but apparently the president enjoyed a meaningful victory there. That means something. The fact that so far only New Hampshire has switched. You know, this race is interesting on a number of levels. We'll end up waiting on Ohio. But a meaningful and memorable race.
Ohio, New Mexico, and Iowa. We're still waiting to get those results. All right, we'll take another quick break. More coverage from the NASDAQ market site. New York City, CNN election headquarters. We'll be right back.
And they didn't say get together. They're not going to wait for the networks to decide and make an estimate on who won Iowa or who won Ohio. They say that they had told me earlier in the evening that once Nevada was decided, and we have called Nevada, that the president was going to declare victory. They now say they're not going to say what they're going to say, but they will do what they're going to do, and I'm quoting here, whenever they think it's appropriate to do it. So that's a little different than it was a couple of hours ago when they were going to declare victory after Nevada became clear in their minds. They believe they've won Nevada, and we have estimated that they're going to win. They also believe they've won Ohio, which we have not yet been ready to call. They also are now saying that they believe they have won Iowa, which we have not yet decided to call.
And they stopped counting in Iowa, 7 electoral votes there, won't resume for some time now. Well, very interesting, but one wants to be generous and understanding. Both of these presidential campaign camps are under tremendous pressure and strain, greater on Kerry Edwards, because it certainly looks like George Bush may wind up being reelected, but also on the Bush campaign, because you know, it is important what they say in the early hours of this next day of anything will help set a tone, and whatever they say as time goes along, if they are the winners, will set a tone, at least in the early going for the next administration. So one can understand why they changed their mind, and indeed they may have thought that by this time the Kerry campaign might concede. I don't think they really believed that was going to happen, but it was kind of a wait-and-see attitude. So one can understand that just after 5 o'clock in the morning that the people at the White House are saying, you know what, time out. We're going to think it over, then we'll decide what it is we're going to say. Dan Rather at CBS News Election Headquarters in New York. Stay here with us. We've got a lot more to cover for you as dawn approaches in New York City.
I deserve relief from my symptoms. I'm asking my doctor.
Georgia, Millicent, and in Louisiana.
Where Vitter is leading.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's a clean sweep for the Republicans in the South. The Democrats gained a seat in Colorado, where Ken Salazar replaced Ben Neidhaus Campbell. And
Ohio. Ohio, Iowa, and New Mexico. The White House Chief of Staff Andy Card expected to head over a couple blocks away from the White House to the Reagan Center to speak to supporters there, speak on behalf of the president. We're standing by to hear what Andy Card may have to say. We'll bring that live to our viewers. David Gergen joining us now. We've said good morning to Jeff Greenfield. He's going to get a couple hours sleep before he's back on the air. He's, of course, did an excellent job, as he always does. David, did you anticipate it was going to fall out as it is falling out?
I sure as hell never anticipated doing early morning television like this. No, I didn't anticipate this. I don't think any of us did. We looked at the polls over the last few weeks. Conventional wisdom was the president gets 48, 49% in the final polls. He's not going to get much more than that, maybe 1% more in the actual election. He got way over that, and I think that left everyone sort of puzzled. What the heck happened? I have yet to hear a theory of the case, in effect, for what happened, why it really happened. I mean, we have individual states we look at, we know where he is, but something happened here that's pretty dramatic, and it's, for the Democrats, it's more than just the candidate. Now, I would make this argument. The white vote is about 80% of the national vote. Bush won by 15%. Last time around, he won by a much smaller margin. That went up considerably. But the Democrats haven't won a majority of the white vote since 1964 in a presidential election. They haven't won a majority of the national vote, 50% or more, since 1976. Yeah, this is a party that's got some serious questions of how do you get a majority of Americans to support it. It's a big, big question. Since 1994 in the congressional elections, this is the sixth one now. In 6 congressional elections in a row, I don't think they've broken 48.5% of the total vote.
So here's going to be one of the critiques that we'll hear tomorrow and going forward, assuming the Democrats lose. They'll say for the second time in a row, they snatched defeat from the jaws of victory, right? They'll say that Al Gore was coming off a 2-term Democratic presidency with prosperity, with peace, wouldn't use Bill Clinton well, and ultimately won the popular vote but lost that election. They'll say, here came John Kerry with a war that clearly wasn't popular, mixed at best, with an economy that, while getting better, was still somewhat troubled, and particularly in places like Ohio, where the unemployment rate was higher than the 5.4% national average, and still he couldn't ultimately deliver. And so I think one of the other pieces you're going to hear is, are we choosing the wrong candidates? Are we choosing the Ivy League educated, straight, tall, and erect guys who ultimately aren't connecting in the way that Bill Clinton did, aren't connecting maybe in the way that a governor from Plains once upon a time did? And I think you're going to hear that critique again, that we've got to choose not only policy but personality going forward.
I don't want to jump ahead, though. We haven't yet projected Ohio. That's going to make all the difference in the world. The only thing we've concluded so far, it's too close to call. We can't call. It's a green state as far as we're looking at all those numbers. We don't know how many provisional ballots there are out in Ohio. We don't know where they're going to come down, how many will be accepted, how many will go for Bush, how many will go for Kerry. You're sort of.
One of our viewers writes in and asks this question because of the situation in Ohio with these provisional ballots. That's what we're hearing. The count shows about 100,000 plus votes for President Bush. That state still not being called, though, and Kerry's camp not conceding it because of the issue of provisional ballots. Explain that.
Well, I mean, we have these ballots. They're not the same as absentee ballots. They're provisional ballots that could be rejected. It's someone who goes in and says, this is my polling place, I'm not registered here, and it's up in the air how many of them will be counted, how they'll break, and how many that's really out still.
But why is it an issue right now in Ohio? For example, in Pennsylvania, it looks like John Kerry pulled out a win in Pennsylvania by 120,000 votes. There's no provisional ballot issue in that state?
There are provisional ballots in that state. They're not as stringent as they are in Ohio. In Ohio, they're
wanted it to work out. It has nothing to do with who won and who lost. I just thought that it'd be better if we could have a cleaner result for you tonight. But that's how the system is in this country. It's very often uneven. And what has been a real privilege for me is to be here, not just every 4 years, but every 2 years as well on congressional election nights. It's always reaffirming because of you, because when the system goes off the tracks, it didn't go off the tracks as completely tonight as it did 4 years ago. You're there, you're patient, and you take your time and you have forbearance with all of us and with the politicians as well. And at the end of a night like this, what I'm really struck by is that for all of the emotion in the Kerry campaign, there are no troops in the streets in Boston, no tanks rumbling anywhere around his hotel. No one's going to go to jail as a result of what's going on in this contest in Ohio. We'll work it out. Not everyone will be happy with the results, but somehow they'll find a way to deal with this country and whoever wins and that agenda for the next 4 years and try to put their party back together again. And for me, having done this for 42 years, I find it nothing less than awe-inspiring to sit here and share that information with you. And I am so grateful to you for not just the opportunity to do it, but the graciousness with which you have accepted me into your homes, into your lives. I'll be around for a while yet, but this is my last election night in this chair. But as you saw tonight, we've got a great team coming up, and most of all, as these guys know, the real heroes are back here behind the cameras and behind the scenes. I'll see you later on the Today Show. Chris Matthews is coming up in a few moments, and of course, later tonight on NBC Nightly News.
The FX from Infinity. Hospital infections.
Spring before we knew who the president was.
All right, well then we'll keep your number in the file effects just in case. Hopefully that won't be the case.
I hope not.
Thank you so much, though, for being with us. We appreciate it. And still ahead, we talked to South Dakota Senator-elect John Thune. He beat longtime Senator Tom Daschle. We're going to talk about that. Plus, we'll take a legal look at the ballot battle in Ohio. Stay with us.
13 hours now. Good morning to you. Welcome to the second half hour of Daybreak. That's technically from the CNN Global headquarters in Atlanta. I'm Carol Costello. Let's take a look at the headlines first, shall we? Ohio still undecided because of the question over provisional ballots. Those ballots involve voters whose names did not show up on a registration list.
Undecided at this point. ABC's Lauren Rogers has been here in Washington following the Bush campaign, how they're reacting to all of this. Of course, it's been a long night both for the Bush campaign and the media following this story. Let's go to Lauren now for the very latest. Again, she is standing here in Washington at the Reagan Center where there had been, we hoped, a victory celebration or a victory speech. It didn't happen. We are having some technical difficulties with Lauren. We believe she's standing by. In the meantime, we can tell you the same in Boston, where crowds of Kerry supporters had gathered there to watch and wait to hear from Senator Kerry. They instead heard from John Edwards. We will hear from him coming up. Again, let's get back to Lauren Rogers, who's here in Washington with more on the Bush campaign.
Michigan at this hour with 51% of the vote.
One more goes up in the blue category for John Kerry, and there it is, 238 electoral votes for John Kerry, 269 for George Bush. Still watching very closely the western states of Nevada and New Mexico, and still way out there on the East Coast, New Hampshire has not come in with an official winner in the state of New Hampshire as of yet. Of course, that's in John Kerry's backyard, in his home state of Massachusetts, and that also a very, very close vote total at this time.
And Jacques, I was going to ask you in just a moment, we see just 269 electoral votes for the president. We do want to mention, though, before, as we go through some of these swing states still in play right now, New Hampshire with 95% of the vote in.
Provisional ballots. Remember, those are ballots people came to the polls trying to vote. Someone at the polls challenged them, and under federal law they said, okay, you vote over here, but it's a provisional vote. We'll decide later whether it's legal. So while it's mathematically, in theory, possible for John Kerry to carry Ohio, it's odds against, and that's the reason the Bush team is pressing so hard on having Andrew Card come over and make some kind of public announcement, because they'd like to get it started that, listen, we've won, and the gracious thing for the Kerry Edwards ticket to do would be to concede. However, as long as Ohio has not officially counted all its votes and made some decision, at least in the coming hours and perhaps days, we now stand, it appears unlikely they're going to concede, although the pressure will be on them to do so. Ed Bradley.
Well, Dan, we took a look at the time that people
made their decision. And you can see why the candidates were out so frenetically in the last month, particularly the last week of this campaign. This election, 78% of those in our exit polls said they made up their minds more than a month ago. That's 4 out of every 5 voters, and President Bush won those 52 to 47%. Comparing that with the last election in 2000, 69% decided more than a month before the election. And Senator Kerry had the best closing argument. Of the 11% who made up their minds in the very last week of this campaign, he won them 53 to 45%. Let's check in with the Bush and Kerry campaign headquarters. First, Wyatt Andrews at the White House. Wyatt?
Mean waiting until all of the votes in Ohio that were cast yesterday are counted, or waiting for all of those provisional ballots, a process that may take up to 10 days. We will probably not hear anything more definitive from the Kerry camp until around 10 o'clock this morning. Back to you.
Okay, Rob Reynolds in Boston, thank you. Let's hop.
At least with a strategy to win, but also with an eye towards an exit strategy.
How long do they draw this out?
Well, you know, draw it out as an emotional term, but I think that they have to conduct it in a dignified way, because for the public, this process has been going on since last January, and it's been hammering on, and so I think the public wants a swift resolution of this in any direction.
And Rich, as a Republican strategist, is it now the Republicans' move to just sit back and wait? I mean, they're feeling very comfortable at what's going on. Is it up to the Democrats to concede before the Republicans make a move?
No, I don't think so. I think Republicans wait a reasonable amount of time, frankly, until one of these other states come in, whether it's Iowa or Nevada or New Mexico. And as soon as the total exceeds 270, I think it's legitimate for the Republicans, especially the Bush campaign, to declare victory. And then the Kerry campaign can do whatever it wants. I agree with Jacques that the Kerry campaign is in a very precarious position here. The fact is that we have been talking about this since about midnight, and the fact is there are not enough votes out there to realistically change Ohio. And for the Kerry campaign to try to somehow
Ask you the same thing, Jim. What do you know? What do you hear? What do you think?
Well, Dan, as Election Day threatens to stretch into Election Week, we're kind of dealing with the same situation that Wyatt Andrews is talking about, and that is the managing of the impression. You have the managing of whatever is happening in terms of the reality of the votes. Then you also have the managing of the public impression that you're going to create based on how you handle the situation. In the Kerry Edwards case, they have to worry about how to proceed tomorrow in terms of how far to push this thing, because they certainly have to keep in mind the election 4 years ago and the feeling among many of the Democratic Party faithful that the Gore-Lieberman team sort of gave up the ghost a little too early. On the other hand, they can't afford to be looking to push into areas that it's interesting that Wyatt used that word unseemly, because I think that the Kerry Edwards team runs that risk as well. So whatever they're going to do, as we've been saying now for the last couple of hours, we're probably not going to get too much insight into that for another couple of hours, because they have said expect to hear nothing before 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, or I guess I should say a little later this morning. Dan?
Well, Jim Axelrod making it clear, as Wyatt Andrews did before, that in both camps now it's advantage Bush. He's breathtakingly close to being able to point to a certified, bona fide victory, but he's not quite there yet. It'll be a battle for hearts and minds as we get into the daylight hours. And one can hear Pauls in both camps saying, whatever you're going to do, don't do it in the wee hours of the morning. You know, there's that old saying that it's true, that politicians, hangmen, and journalists all do their best work after midnight. But when it comes to trying to convince people of a certain position, be better to get in the daylight where people are awake and maybe, 8, 9, 10 o'clock in the morning, who can say. But let me go here to the reporter's notebook. I want to talk to Bob Schieffer in a moment, but I'm so concerned that people may say, you're carrying me fast here. I don't quite understand where we are. Remember, it takes 270 electoral votes to win. Right now, that means that George Bush needs 16. John Kerry needs 28. Now, Ohio has not been settled. If you go to Ohio, and if George Bush should carry Ohio, he'd be over the top. The 20 electoral votes would do it for him there. But here's the situation, that even if George Bush does not carry Ohio, let's just say that Ohio goes for John Kerry, then George Bush would need to win And he could still get over the top if he carried Wisconsin's 10 electoral votes. If George Bush got Wisconsin's 10, and they're hanging out there, and he got Iowa's 7, they stopped counting in Iowa, but at the last count, George Bush was winning. So that, a combination of Wisconsin and Iowa, would put George Bush over the top, even if he doesn't carry Ohio. On the other hand, if, let us say, Wisconsin turns out going for John Kerry, then George Bush would still be needing, 7 out of Iowa and 5 out of New Mexico would put him right there. But both sides are pointing at Ohio because it has the 20 electoral votes. Just want to make clear that we understand as we go into this, Kerry needs 28, Bush needs 16. Bush wins Ohio, it's all over. Kerry wins Ohio, he still needs 8 more electoral votes, which he'd have to get out of either Wisconsin's 10 or a combination of Iowa's 7 and New Mexico's 5. That's why we say, while we have not said in our CBS News estimate that George Bush is the winner, it's clearly shaded in that direction. Bob Schieffer.
Well, more information coming from the White House. We're getting it now from multiple sources. Our reporter, Mark Knoller, says that the White House will announce that the president is convinced that he has won, but will not declare victory. Well, we already know he and the vice president have both gone to bed for the evening. We hear from our man, Jeff Goldman, who is down at the Reagan building, that the White House Chief of Staff, Andy Card, is on the way down there.
We understand Andy Card is at the Reagan building in Washington. Let's check to see whether that report is true. Wyatt Andrews, is he there yet? Apparently we don't know. We may have pulled the trigger. Andrew Card, here he is.
That President Bush has won re-election with at least 286 electoral college votes. And he also had a margin of more than 3.5 million popular votes. President Bush's decisive margin of victory makes this the first presidential election since 1988 in which the winner received a majority of the popular vote. And in this election, President Bush received more votes than any presidential candidate in our country's history. Republicans also scored other great victories in this election. We won important victories adding to our majority in the House and adding to our majority in the Senate. In Ohio, President Bush has a lead of at least 140,000 votes. The Secretary of State's office has informed us that this margin is statistically insurmountable, even after the provisional ballots are considered. So President Bush has won the state of Ohio. President Bush has also been declared the winner in Nevada. The other victories that he has had will be added with the strong showing of margins that we are looking at in Iowa and New Mexico, and we're also going to put those states in the winners column as well. This all adds up to a convincing electoral college victory, as well as a strong endorsement of President Bush by his fellow Americans in the popular vote. President Bush decided to give Senator Kerry the respect of more time to reflect on the results of this election. The President will be making a statement later today. Again, I thank all of you who stayed up these many hours waiting for the opportunity to celebrate this victory. And I also thank all of the volunteers all across this great country that work so hard. But most importantly, I thank the many voters who participated in this important election. It was a great celebration of our democracy. Thank you, and God bless you.
Andrew Card, chief of President Bush's White House staff, comes over to those who have stuck it out all night long waiting to celebrate and, in effect, declaring victory. Now, you heard him say, now whether this turns out to be the case or not, we'll have to wait and see. But you heard Andrew Card say that President Bush, in the final analysis, it's their belief, they are convinced that he will win with a commanding lead in actual votes counted. We'll put up the actual votes counted and show you what he's talking about there in just a moment. But in terms of the electoral votes, Andrew Card is saying we feel confident that we are going to carry Ohio with its 20, Iowa with its 7, and New Mexico with its 5. That would give them a total of 286 electoral votes, doing the arithmetic in my head, with Wisconsin remaining undecided. So it's the Bush-Cheney team saying, we got it won, we got it made. Ohio, Iowa, New Mexico isn't even going to be close, regardless of what Wisconsin does. Now, on the votes in and counted, we'll show you what the national vote looks like, and this is why Andy Card was saying not only will it be a rather substantial electoral college victory, in the opinion of the Bush-Cheney campaign, but this is the way the votes in and counted look at this moment, and President Bush has a substantial lead, one would say an insurmountable lead, in the actual vote count nationwide. So Andy Card is sent out to do his job. He's one of the people closest to President Bush, sent out to tell the crowd and send an early signal to the nation, we think we've won. And then he said, you could call it gracious if you like, you could call it condescending if you didn't like it, said the president wants to do the classy thing and give his opponent more time to ponder what it is he's going to do. Now, Bob Schieffer, have we ever seen this before, a unilaterally declaring victory in effect?
Well, I haven't. I can't recall a night quite like this. We all said we hoped we didn't have a night like 2000. Well, we certainly didn't, did we? That was something that remains unique, and as far as I know, I've never seen anything quite like this. He is saying that that this is a win, is a majority of the popular vote, that more votes than any presidential candidate in history has ever received. Of course, the population gets larger and larger. I think Lyndon Johnson still holds the record for the largest landslide in electoral votes, if I remember, in 1964. But there's no question the president has received a sizable majority here, 3.8 million in the popular vote. And they are claiming that he has also won by a very substantial margin in the electoral votes. I guess what we have to do now is wait and see that all these votes are counted and see if what they say and what they claim is true. But they, I just talked to the White House a while ago, and they said they were not going to base anything on any concession statement or waiting for a concession statement. Well, obviously, the president says he wants to wait for a concession statement, but they're claiming victory. No way around it.
I could be wrong, but I believe that Ronald Reagan had a bigger electoral vote victory, because my recollection is in 1984.
He may have.
Mondale carried only one state, the state of Minnesota. But President Johnson may have had the largest percentage vote
That's
victory.
what I think.
We'll have to see. But all that's moot. That's moot at the moment. The plan, so far as we can make it out, folks, as per Andy Card, is that President Bush is going to declare victory, saying, listen, I've won the national vote, the actual votes nationwide counted, that I'm going to wind up with at least 286 electoral votes. The way he would get to that, we have President Bush now, our estimate is he has 254. If he wins Iowa, which Andy Card says they're absolutely convinced in the end they will get, that'll give him 20. Iowa, where they were leading in the count when the count was suspended because of, among other things, some faulty machines or machine problems, and when in New Mexico, so it's 20 in Ohio, 7 in Iowa, 5 in New Mexico, added to the present 254. That would put him at 286, regardless of what Wisconsin does with its 10 electoral votes. So that's the arithmetic on which they're basing this. Now, you can bet that the Kerry Edwards team is going to have something to say before the day gets too far along. What they're going to say, well, we'll just have to wait and see. We'll have more, a lot more, just after these messages, so stay here with us.
President Bush in those 3 counties, but in that all-important I-4 corridor from Tampa, St. Pete to Daytona Beach, the majority of those 700,000 undecided, I will make up my mind at the last-minute voters, a good chunk of those went for President Bush in greater numbers. Now, here in Palm Beach County, home of that butterfly ballot of 2000, the new wrinkle seemed to be the more than 100,000 absentee ballots. As many as 70,000 have yet to be counted. There will be, as we understand, hundreds of
probably are. What inspired people to go to the polls? What inspired them to vote the way they did? MSNBC's Allison Stewart has been looking at some of that exit poll information. She joins us now with the details on that. Allison?
Thanks so much, Randy. Amy, here in the tracking center, we're looking at how the 2 candidates did fare in Ohio during the Bush years. 16% of its manufacturing jobs been lost since March of 2001. Let's look at those polls. Our NBC exit poll in Ohio finds voters with a high level of unhappiness regarding the state's economy.
That are still up in the air and maybe headed to the courts when we come right back.
Now playing at the Kodak Theater.
Term easily defeating Republican rancher Al King. And in Georgia, Republican Johnny Isaacson was elected to a first term in the Senate. He replaces Democrat Zell Miller.
It looks like those get out the vote campaigns got results. Record numbers of people registered for the 2004 election. Now, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, that includes 16.5 million new voters who've turned 18 since the last election. And the electorate also increased more than 17% in the key battleground state of Florida. Ohio's voter,
while Montana became the 10th state to approve the idea. Liz, now back to you.
Thank you very much. The markets are reacting very positively so far to what is expected to be a victory for President Bush. But should investors expect a long-lasting rally? We will discuss that and more next.
And we want to hear from you as well on
Interesting to those who watched these election results come in and those who actually visited the polls was the lack of the youth vote. Remember, the 29 to 18 age group, the get out the vote. Apparently, the percentage of those voting, 17%, mirrors the 17% in 2000. So that attempt to get more young people to vote, at least in this election, did not come to fruition.
Right now at this hour, though, as we mentioned, there are still 6 states in play, too close to call. At least, I think they're now down to 5 because we did call Michigan just a few moments ago. There's a look at those states that are still in play at this hour. Nevada, New Mexico, Iowa, New Hampshire, all still in play at this hour.
And here's where it gets interesting. Nevada and New Mexico and Iowa are all, at least at this point in the morning, in the Bush category. Some 10,000 to 12,000 votes separating him in New Mexico. About 15,000 votes separating him from John Kerry in Iowa, and Nevada, much the same story. He needs to take one of those to push him over the 269, which he has right now, to broach the 270 magical electoral college number.
I also did leave out the state of Wisconsin, which is leaning Kerry at this hour as well. I knew you'd be upset about that. Let's take a look at the electoral vote totals at this hour as we know it. There is the president with 269. Of course, he needs that magic 270. John Kerry at this hour with 238 electoral votes.
All right, let's talk to a couple people back here this morning.
We have a few people who have amazingly
It is early. Can you follow us, guys?
stayed with us here throughout the night.
All right, Ohio still believes from the Kerry Edwards camp that it is in play. You're here, still supporting your candidate. What are you thinking right now? Do you think that it's a realistic approach to think that John Kerry can still win this election?
Yes, I do.
Why?
Because we've been out here this long and it keeps getting better and better.
Let me ask,
optimistic.
Why have you been out here and what have you seen? What has it been like? What has this experience been like for you out here in Democracy Plaza?
Look, I'm right here because I support Kerry 100%. And I hope he be the next president of the United States. I really love the guy. I think he wants to do something for America. I seen him when he was young, standing up in front of a president, in front of the whole world against the war in Vietnam. And I believe that this man could be a better commander in chief.
Let me ask you.
I hope he wins.
What is your first name?
Leslie.
Leslie, if John Kerry does not win this election, are Democrats willing to bring this nation together? We've been apart. We've been a divided nation for many months now over this election. Are Democrats willing to come together, realize that we have 4 more years of President Bush, if in fact that's the way it turns out, and bring this country together?
I can't speak for everybody, but hopefully. I don't know. I can't speak for everybody, but God help us.
Can you speak for yourself on that front?
God help us if he does win and Kerry does.
Is that a no? You don't believe you can rectify some of the divide that has separated this nation?
I don't think so.
Now, you all have been out here all night, correct? So, and I want to ask you, because earlier we saw quite a bit of rivalry going on. What was that like? I saw a lot of Bush supporters out here earlier. You all obviously have stuck it out a little bit later. But tell me what that was like.
I think some people on both sides are a little more vociferous and a little more emotional, and at that moment tempers were raised, people were tired, they'd been here all night, but it seems to have calmed down, and I think the people here we're having some good communication between both sides and sharing some ideas, and that's what this is supposed to be about.
What about the Democratic Party in general? One quick question. The Democratic Party, if they do not win this election, has some healing to do. The Democratic Party needs to come together on some fronts, on some issues. What do you believe the Democratic Party needs to do in this country right now to bring its forces together, to bring its people together in the next election, if that's possible?
Well, I think that, too, we need to, sort of revisit our ideas of, morality. That seems to be, the great divide within the Democratic Party. So some more conversation there, more conversation about tolerance within the party. It's most disheartening to see what is happening in the South, which I definitely felt morality was one of the divisive issues and why we lost some of those states.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
How long do you guys plan on staying out here? I have to ask you that.
How long does it take?
As long as
Until we get some donuts.
All right.
Oh, we can probably help you out with that.
All right.
Thank you, guys. We appreciate it. We want to recap, of course, what we know at this hour. As we mentioned, 5 states now, still too close to call at this hour. If we can go through those states for you, we can let everyone know exactly what we're looking at as we go into the morning hours here. Too close to call, Iowa with 99% in right now. The vote difference just over 15,000. The president with the edge on that one.
And also too close to call in the state of, I'm going to guess here and say Nevada. Too close to call there. About 10,000 votes separating them in Nevada. Also in New Mexico. You mentioned Iowa. We've got New Hampshire still in play, and Wisconsin.
So we are going to hand things over to IMEST in the morning. They're going to take over after we get to this break.
Yeah, it's going to come up pretty quick here. But the one thing we want to talk about from Democracy Plaza throughout the morning here is the counting of these final votes. Again, the state of Ohio is the one to watch. If the Democratic Party concedes there,
by individual to make these decisions. If that then is taken the next step, we're in a court situation where, for example, the Democrats would try to get people together who would say, look, I went to the polls and I was harassed by the poll watchers and forced to, to sign one of these provisional ballots.
Right.
I should never have even been put in that position.
Right.
Look for that kind of case.
Okay, and it says that the provisional ballots are only counted when the margin of victory is smaller than the number of provisional ballots cast. So we not have that answer
exactly.
yet
We
either.
need to know
We don't
how
have
many
that answer.
ballots. Yeah, exactly.
All right,
exactly.
so a lot going on. It's almost 6 o'clock a.m. Eastern time, and we still do not know who is president of the United States today.
Terry Ann's, thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, you're welcome.
Perfect guest at this hour.
And Lise Wheel, as always, thank you as well.
Okay. Just ahead on Fox and Friends, the presidential election has come and gone. Not quite. There's still no winner yet. We have the election at 269 electoral votes and counting.
270 needed to win, so we're going to be live in the key states for breaking results. 4 states still up in the air right now from Fox News, and we're going to bring you more information on that. Plus, how did the Sunshine State handle this election? Far from what happened in 2000. We're going to talk to Florida Congressman Mark Foley coming up.
Stay tuned. The A-Team's coming in just a second. Stephen Bryan.
Are numbered. You're watching Daybreak for Wednesday, November 3rd.